Get off your knees and get out of my suite, sir. I need 1 more minute. 1 more minute. You don't get minutes. You get a mop and a bucket and you use them fast. Richard Marsh, Chief of Medicine, 22 years. Tom Ford suit stood over Jennifer and kicked the gray bucket hard. The water hit the marble with a sound like a gunshot in a church. Clean it up. Then get out. Jennifer looked at the water spreading across the floor. She looked at the crystal pitcher on William's bedside table. She looked at Richard. There is a paralytic agent in that water pitcher, she said. I can smell it from here. 6 board assistants in the hallway went completely still. Richard stepped forward and lowered his voice. You are a janitor. Jennifer set her mop against the wall. She pulled her yellow rubber gloves off finger by finger. She reached into her pocket and placed a small medication cup on the marble beside his shoe. She looked at him. Test it, she said.
Wrong move. He mistook a faded uniform for a lack of intelligence. Let me take you back.
The executive boardroom was dead silent. Dr. Richard smoothed his custom-tailored suit, a victorious smirk playing on his lips as he held the digital pen over the $500 million medical proxy transfer. In the corner, Jennifer stood handcuffed to a security chair, her gray janitor's uniform stained with the very floor cleaner Richard had violently kicked onto her 72 hours ago. He had called her uneducated trash. He had fired her, framed her for theft, and was now seconds away from legally sealing the slow, quiet murder of billionaire William. Richard pressed the pen to the glowing screen, confident that his wealth in a white coat made him invincible. He thought he had buried the only person smart enough to catch him in the act. But Richard didn't know what was waiting on the other side of those heavy boardroom doors. The water was wrong. Jennifer noticed it the moment she rolled her mop cart through the doorway of Suite 700. The pitcher on William's bedside table caught the afternoon light. The water inside it was not clear. It was faintly cloudy, the kind of cloudy that had nothing to do with temperature or sediment. She had seen that particular opacity exactly once before in a graduate laboratory 12 years ago. Her hand already reaching for the cart handle went still. She did not move toward the pitcher. She did not look at it again. She kept her eyes on the floor and began to mop. The suite was immaculate cold and deliberately quiet. William lay in the center of it, propped against high thread count pillows, his chest rising in shallow, measured intervals. His skin had the wax quality of someone whose body was deciding something important. The monitors beside him beeped at polite, unhurried intervals, steady, regular, and deeply misleading. Jennifer worked her way toward the window, slow and deliberate. The imported Italian marble reflected everything back in perfect miniature: the chrome IV stand, the white ceiling, the pale oblong of William's face, and below that pale face, the bedside table. And on that table, the pitcher. The scent reached her before she expected it. Faint, almost botanical. Underneath the industrial bleach on her uniform, underneath the lemon disinfectant she had used on the corridor an hour before, there it was. Bitter almonds, not strong, not obvious. Precisely controlled the way a compound smells when it has been diluted to its functional threshold rather than detectable one. Jennifer did not stop mopping. Her jaw did not tighten. She breathed through her mouth and kept her eyes on the floor. The door opened behind her. Richard entered without looking at her. He never looked at her. He moved directly to William's bedside, lifted the chart from its hook, and began reading with the unhurried confidence of a man who already knew every number on the page. His Tom Ford suit caught the light. The monogrammed edge of his white coat settled perfectly at his hip. He set the chart down and reached for William's wrist, checking the pulse with 2 fingers, clinical and sure. Jennifer reached the corner near the bedside table. Her mop moved in slow arcs. The bitter almond scent was stronger here, concentrated. She let her eyes drop to the small plastic medication cup beside the pitcher, half crushed, sitting in the rim of the trash bin. A disposal oversight. Careless or deliberate, she could not yet determine. Richard looked up from the chart. You missed a section, he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. By the window, do it again. Jennifer nodded once. She turned the cart. She did not hurry. She did not apologize. She turned the cart slowly, and in the movement of turning, her right hand dropped below the rim of the bin and closed around the plastic cup. She slipped it into the deep front pocket of her jumpsuit in the same motion she used to gather the mop handle. Seamless, unhurried, gone. She began mopping the window section again. Richard watched her for 3 seconds. Then he looked back at William. "His cognition is declining faster than projected," he said, not to William, not to Jennifer apparently, to the room itself. He lifted William's eyelid with one thumb and shone a small pen light into the pupil. "We may need to accelerate the timeline on the proxy consultation." Ashley, standing near the door with a tablet pressed to her chest, wrote something down. Her eyes moved to Jennifer once. They moved away. Jennifer kept mopping. The bucket tipped without warning. Richard's foot caught the base of it, a deliberate, precise movement dressed as an accident, and the gray water spread across 6 feet of Italian marble in a single, indifferent wave. It soaked through Jennifer's canvas shoes immediately. The cold came up through the soles, through the thin cotton socks beneath them, and settled into her feet. Richard did not look down. "Clean that up," he said. He was already looking at William's chart again. "Use the rags from your cart and get down on your knees." "I'm not having a mop streak on this floor while my patient is in recovery." Ashley pressed the tablet harder against her chest. Jennifer looked at the water. She looked at the cart. She looked at the pale, wax-faced man in the bed who was not in recovery, who was in fact being made worse by precise, measured increments by the man standing 3 feet from her. She got down on her knees. The marble was cold through the fabric of her jumpsuit. Her rubber gloves made a faint, tacky sound against the floor as she pressed the rag down. She worked methodically, moving outward from the center of the spill. The bleach smell rose up from the water, sharp and honest, and underneath it, threading through it, still present, the bitter almond note from the pitcher. Richard's leather loafers moved past her left hand. He did not step around her. She moved her hand. "Uneducated people," he said, conversational, easy. The tone of a man noting the weather, should not be left unsupervised around medical equipment. He paused at the foot of the bed. "It invites mistakes. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" Jennifer wrung the rag into the bucket. The gray water darkened. "Yes, sir," she said. Richard looked at Ashley. Something passed between them, a look Jennifer had seen in many rooms, the compact understanding of 2 people who share a secret about a third. Ashley dropped her eyes to her tablet. Jennifer kept her own eyes on the floor, on the marble, on the pale, inverted miniatures of the room reflected back at her, the chrome stand, the monogrammed coat, the pitcher with its cloudy, deliberate water. She did not look at her pocket. She did not need to. The plastic cup was there, small, weightless, holding the residue of whatever had been in that pitcher in its prior iteration. Holding, if she was right, if the scent was what she believed it to be, a complete chemical story in a discarded piece of plastic that Richard had been too confident to consider. He had not considered her capable of reading it. He had seen frayed canvas shoes on Italian marble. He had seen a gray uniform and rubber gloves. He had seen a woman scrubbing his floor on her knees, and he had drawn the only conclusion that his experience of the world allowed him to draw. Richard pressed the pen light back into his coat pocket and smoothed the lapel. He took one last look at William, satisfied, clinical, and sure, and walked toward the door. "Finish the rest of the corridor," he said without turning, "and make sure you check with Ashley before you enter any room on this floor again. I don't want unscheduled access." He left. The door settled closed behind him. Ashley stood for a moment longer. She looked at Jennifer, still on her knees, still pressing the rag against the cold marble. She opened her mouth, she closed it, she wrote something on the tablet and followed Richard out. The room was quiet. William breathed in his shallow intervals. The monitors beeped. Jennifer stayed on her knees for exactly as long as it took to be certain the corridor was empty. Then she sat back on her heels, peeled off one rubber glove, and pressed 2 bare fingers lightly against the rim of her pocket, confirming the shape of the cup inside. Bitter almonds. Cloudy water. A man in a bed whose cognition was, according to his own physician, declining faster than projected. She had one question, and it was not a small one. How long did William have if the man in the monogrammed coat was the one controlling the rate of decline? She pulled her glove back on. She got to her feet. She picked up the mop. But Richard didn't know the woman scrubbing his floor could identify a lethal neurotoxin by scent alone. The basement had a particular silence, not quiet, silence. The kind that accumulates in spaces where no one of consequence is expected to go, where the heating pipes run their low, rhythmic conversation with themselves and the fluorescent tubes flicker at the edge of visibility without anyone filing a maintenance report. The janitor's closet at the far end of the B2 corridor was 8 feet by 11 feet. Jennifer had measured it on her second week. She knew the exact clearance between the shelf brackets and the top of the floor buffer unit. She knew which pipe ran hottest at which hour. She knew that between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. the ventilation damper above the utility sink cycled at a frequency that would cover precisely the sound of glass. She locked the door behind her. The plastic cup came out of her pocket first. She set it on the shelf edge, upright, careful. Under the single working fluorescent, the residue inside it was visible as a faint, irregular ring. Pale. Almost nothing. Exactly enough. She looked at what she had to work with. 3 saline flush syringes from a sealed emergency kit, 2 glass specimen tubes from the crash cart. Resupply she had signed for that morning. A strip of pH indicator paper, the cotton filter from a spare mask, and the floor buffer unit bolted to the lower shelf. She had modified the buffer's motor coupling 14 days ago. She had told herself at the time that she was not sure why. That was not entirely true. Jennifer did not have a laboratory. She had a room where the pipes were hot and the ventilation was predictable and the motor ran at 3,400 revolutions per minute when you bypassed the load governor. She began to work. The saline went in first, a precise measure drawn up slowly to avoid turbulence. She introduced it to the cup residue with the syringe tip angled against the interior wall, dissolving the ring from the outside inward. The resulting solution was thin, nearly colorless, and she held it to the light for 3 full seconds before introducing it to the first specimen tube. The buffer motor came on with its low, familiar hum. The pipes answered from above, rhythmic, steady, covering everything. Jennifer set the tube into the makeshift bracket she had rigged from a wire cable clip and stepped back. The centrifuge was not a centrifuge. It was a modification of a floor machine, a coupling she had machined from a shelf bracket and a steel collar 2 weeks ago, in the same quiet hour, in the same room for a reason she had not yet named to herself. It was not elegant. It was precise. She waited. The hum filled the closet. The fluorescent tube above her pulsed once, recovered, held. At the 4-minute mark, she stopped the motor and removed the tube. The solution had stratified. The lower fraction was denser, slightly opaque. She transferred it to the second tube with the second syringe, introduced the pH strip, and set it against the shelf edge under the light. The color change was slow. She watched it move from yellow-green toward a deeper register through amber, settling finally into a shade she had last seen in a toxicology reference photograph in her second year of graduate study. Violet. A particular damning shade of violet. She set the tube down. She stood in the 8x11 room with the pipes running above her and the motor cooling in front of her, and she let herself understand what she had just confirmed, not suspected. Confirmed. The compound was a slow-acting paralytic structurally consistent with a class of synthetic neurotoxins that mimicked natural neurological decline. Tasteless at this concentration, odorless to most people. Administered consistently over 10 to 14 days, it would present as accelerating cognitive deterioration, progressive motor failure, and at terminal dosage, respiratory arrest, indistinguishable to a casual examination from organ failure in an elderly, critically ill patient. She thought about what Richard had said in Suite 700. His cognition is declining faster than projected. We may need to accelerate the timeline on the proxy consultation. She thought about the proxy clause. She had cleaned the boardroom on the 8th floor 6 days ago. The documents on the table had been face-up spread for review, and she had moved around them without touching them because that was what you did, and because she had read every page in the 40 seconds it took to empty the waste bin near the head of the table. a medical proxy transfer contingent on demonstrated incapacitation. $500 million held in trust released on a physician's signed certification of terminal cognitive decline. Richard's signature was already on the certification line, pre-signed, dated 3 days forward. Jennifer picked up the second syringe. She opened the crash cart resupply kit and located the activated charcoal pouch, the sodium bicarbonate vial, and the 0.9 saline bags she had requisitioned that morning under the standard inventory restocking code. She set them in a line on the shelf. She considered each one. The antidote she needed did not exist in any of those materials in finished form. It existed, however, as a function of 3 separate compounds, combined at a specific ratio, buffered to the correct pH, and introduced at a slow enough rate that the patient's system absorbed it before the next poisoning increment could saturate the receptor sites further. She had built more complex things from less. She began to crush the activated charcoal against the shelf surface, with the flat of the syringe barrel working at fine, methodical, applying even pressure. The low hum of the pipes settled around her. The fluorescent tube held steady. Outside the closet, the B2 corridor was empty, silent, and completely unaware of what was being assembled in the dark behind a locked utility door. She worked for 2 hours. She did not hurry. She did not stop. When she was finished, the second specimen tube held a clear, faintly alkaline solution. Small, precise. Enough for a first introduction into an IV line, if she could reach the IV line, if she could reach the room, if she could reach William before the compound and that cloudy picture advanced another increment toward the point of no return. She looked at the tube for a long moment. She looked at the residue of violet in the first tube beside it. The silent war had officially begun and the battlefield was a simple glass of water. But the question sitting cold and unanswered in the 8-foot by 11-foot dark was whether she would be caught swapping the IV fluids before the poison stopped William's heart completely. 2 days passed the way hard days do, not quickly, not slowly, in increments measured by corridor lengths and shift rotations and the exact number of seconds Richard's footsteps took to cross the VIP ward from the elevator bank to Suite 700. Jennifer had counted them on the first day. 23 seconds from the elevator tone to the suite door. She built her windows from that number. She worked the double shifts without complaint. She signed the extra hours under the standard staffing shortage code. Unremarkable, the kind of paperwork that accumulated in hospital systems and was reviewed by no one. She cleaned the corridor outside Suite 700 3 times per shift. She mopped around the nursing station. She emptied the waste bins near the medication cart in the precise sequence that placed her at 7:14 each morning and 8:50 each evening within arm's reach of the IV pole beside William's bed. The syringe fit inside the rubber glove, along the palm flat against the lifeline held in place by the tension of the latex. From the outside, the glove looked like a glove, heavy yellow utilitarian, the kind of thing no one in a Tom Ford suit looked at directly. The first introduction took 11 seconds. She had rehearsed it in the basement the night before, working with a saline bag and a cap needle against the closet shelf, running the motion until her hands stopped anticipating it and simply did it. Uncap, locate port, insert, depress, recap. The sequence had to happen inside the natural motion of wiping down the IV stand. It had to look like cleaning. It had to feel to any eye in the room like the invisible expected labor of a woman whose entire purpose was to make surfaces look untouched. On the first morning, Ashley was in the room. Jennifer did not adjust her pace. She moved to the IV stand with the cloth in her left hand, the gloved right hand dropping to the lower rail of the pole as she wiped the upper section. The syringe moved in a single unhurried arc. Ashley was writing on her tablet. The motion was finished before Ashley's stylus completed its downstroke. Jennifer moved to the window and began on the glass. On the second morning, Richard was present. He stood at the foot of William's bed with his back to the IV pole, reviewing the morning chart. Jennifer entered at her scheduled time cart, first head down. She could hear his breathing, controlled even the breathing of a man who was comfortable in every room he entered. She moved to the far wall first, working away from the bed, establishing her pattern, and when Richard stepped toward the monitoring equipment, she crossed behind him in the corridor of his blind spot and reached the IV stand in the same motion she used to collect the waste bin from beneath the bedside table. 11 seconds. Richard did not turn around. She emptied the waste bin, replaced the liner, and moved to the window. On the second evening, something changed. William's hand moved. It was small. Almost nothing. She was crouched beneath the bed, running the cloth along the base of the frame, and she saw it at eye level, the index finger of his left hand lying against the high thread count sheet, twitching once against the fabric. Not a reflex arc, not a monitor artifact. A movement. Deliberate, effortful, brief. Jennifer stayed very still. The finger settled. The monitors beeped their polite, unhurried rhythm. From the corridor, the distant tone of the elevator sounded, and Jennifer counted without meaning to. 23 seconds. She finished the base of the bed frame and stood up. She did not look at William's hand again. She did not need to. The antidote was integrating. The receptor sites were clearing, slowly, unevenly, but moving in the direction that mattered. She moved her cart toward the door. The corridor squeak happened without warning. Her left sole caught the tile at the junction between the suite entrance and the main ward floor, and the sound went out ahead of her, sharp, high, and carrying. She stopped. Her hand tightened on the cart handle. From the far end of the corridor, the sound of Richard's footsteps shifted in register, the subtle change of a man who has heard something and recalculated. Jennifer moved the cart to the left off the junction tile and kept walking, steady, unhurried. The heavy rubber soles found the quieter surface of the main corridor and held it. Richard's footsteps continued toward the nursing station. They did not turn. She breathed through her mouth and kept the cart moving. Ashley found her at the supply closet on the third morning. She did not speak immediately. She stood in the doorway while Jennifer restocked the cart, and the silence between them had a specific texture, the silence of someone who has been holding a question for longer than it was comfortable to hold. "You've been spending a lot of time on this floor," Ashley said. Her voice was careful, neutral, built to not commit to anything. Jennifer loaded a fresh set of liner bags onto the lower cart shelf. "Double shift," she said. "Staffing shortage, third week running." Ashley looked at the cart. She looked at Jennifer's hands, the thick yellow gloves, the ordinary inventory of a cleaning cart. She looked briefly at the corridor behind her. "Dr. Richard runs a tight ward," Ashley said. It was not a warning. It was not an absolution. It occupied the uncertain space between them, a fact offered without direction. Jennifer set the last liner bag on the shelf. "I noticed," she said. Ashley held the tablet to her chest and left without another word. Jennifer watched the doorway for 3 seconds after she was gone. She thought about Ashley's eyes, the way they had moved to the cart, the way they had moved away. She thought about what fear looked like when it had been worn for long enough to become a habit. She turned back to the cart and finished restocking. She had a 7:14 window in 40 minutes. William's finger had moved against the sheet. The antidote was working, but the question that followed her down every corridor that waited for her at the end of every 23-second count was the one she could not yet answer. Could William recover his speech and his mobility in time to stop the legal transfer of his entire estate?
Wait, he is literally paralyzing his own patient to steal a $500 million empire and treating the only person saving him like dirt. If that were me, I would have taken that mop water and dumped it right over his tailored suit. Imagine knowing exactly how to save a life, but having to do it while scrubbing toilets in the shadows just to survive. The audacity is real.
Richard found the anomaly on a Tuesday. Jennifer knew the exact moment it happened. She was 3 rooms down the corridor, changing a waste bin liner when she heard his footsteps stop outside the nursing station. Not pause, stop. The particular stillness of a man looking at a number that does not match his expectations. She kept her hands moving. Liner out, liner in, hands moving. Richard had been reviewing William's morning vitals. She understood this without seeing it. The stabilization in William's peripheral nerve response had been gradual, careful, exactly calibrated to stay inside the margin of natural variation. But gradual was still a direction. And Richard, whatever else he was a precise man. Precise men noticed directions. His footsteps resumed. They moved towards Suite 700. Jennifer finished the waste bin. She moved her cart to the next room and began on the window. She was back in the corridor at 8:47, 3 minutes ahead of her evening window, when she heard him behind her. "Stop the cart." She stopped it. Richard came around from her left, placing himself between her and the suite door. He was holding the monitoring printout from William's afternoon observation. He looked at it, then at her, then back at the printout with the careful sequential attention of a man assembling something. "What is your cleaning schedule for this ward?" he asked. Jennifer told him. Accurately, completely, without hesitation, every room and every time. The accuracy was the point. There was nothing to find in the schedule itself. The schedule was clean. Richard listened with the printout at his side. His eyes moved to her cart, to the supply rack on the lower shelf, to the IV equipment cleaning solution on the second tier. "You've been near the IV equipment in 700, he said. It was not a question. "The stand needs wiping down every shift," Jennifer said. "It's on the ward protocol sheet. Infection control requirement." Richard looked at her for a long moment. The smirk was not present. Something more focused had replaced it, colder, more specific. It was the expression of a man reclassifying a variable he had previously dismissed as negligible. He looked at the cart again. He looked at the waste bin on the lower tier. The bin she had collected from Suite 700 that morning, relined and replaced, now carrying the ordinary residue of the day's work. He reached down and lifted the bin out of the cart. Jennifer watched him do it. She kept her face arranged in the expression of someone mildly confused by a procedure they have no reason to question. Her hands rested on the cart handle, still, controlled. Richard set the bin on the corridor floor and crouched beside it. He was thorough. She had expected him to be. He went through the liner contents with the methodical patience of a man who understood that evidence was a matter of looking in the right place with enough patience to find it. He did not find anything. There was nothing to find. She had been precise about that. He stood. He replaced the bin. He looked at her with the flat, recalibrated attention of a man making a decision. "Finish your shift," he said. "Then report to staffing. I'm requesting a ward reassignment." He walked back toward the suite. Jennifer turned her cart and moved it toward the supply closet. Her pulse was even. Her hands were steady on the handle. She had 12 hours, perhaps less, before the reassignment processed. She had 3 more IV windows before that happened, if she moved the schedule forward, if she accepted the risk of a compressed timeline. She was still calculating when the security officer appeared at the supply closet entrance. He was not alone. A second officer stood behind him, and behind the second officer at the corridor junction, Richard stood with his arms folded and his white coat perfectly settled at his hip. "Jennifer Calloway," the first officer said. He was already moving toward her cart. She did not step back. She did not speak. The officer reached past her and lifted the waste bin from the lower tier of the cart. Not her bin. A different bin entirely, the one from the medication cart in the hallway, which had not been on her route, which she had not touched. The officer reached into it and removed a Ziploc bag. Inside the bag were 4 pill bottles. The labels faced outward, clear and legible. Schedule 2 narcotics. Her employee ID number was written on the bag in black marker. The handwriting was not hers. The marker was not hers. The bag had not been there 20 minutes ago when she had last accessed the lower tier of her cart. The cold came up through the floor and through her canvas shoes and settled in her feet the same way the spilled mop water had 3 days ago. "You're being detained pending a theft investigation," the officer said. He moved behind her. Hands. The cuffs were steel. They closed around her wrists with a sound that was very small and very final, and the pressure of them against the bones of her wrists was precise and cold and indifferent in the way that institutional things are indifferent. She did not pull against them. She did not speak. Richard walked past her toward Suite 700. He did not look at her. He had already reclassified her again back to negligible, back to resolved, back to the category of problems that had been handled. From the far end of the corridor, Ashley stood with her tablet pressed against her chest. Her face was the face of someone watching something they cannot stop and cannot look away from. Richard passed her without acknowledgement. His cold glance touched her for half a second and moved on. The officers walked Jennifer toward the service elevator. The corridor was bright empty and very long. In her left glove, pressed flat against the inside of the palm beneath the latex, something remained, a thing Richard had not found, had not thought to look for. A strip of pH indicator paper still faintly violet at its center, documenting the exact chemistry of a crime. She possessed the undeniable chemical proof to ruin his life, but she was entirely out of time. The security office was in the basement, not B2 where the pipes ran warm and the ventilation was predictable. A different basement, deeper. The kind of room that existed in every large institution, as a practical acknowledgement that certain problems needed to be placed somewhere without windows while they were processed into the appropriate category. The chair was metal. The table was metal. The walls were painted a color that had once been beige and had become, over years of fluorescent exposure, something closer to the color of old decisions. Jennifer sat with her wrists cuffed to the chair frame and looked at the wall. Her phone was on the table in front of her. The screen was cracked along the lower left corner, a crack she had been managing with a strip of packing tape for 3 months because the replacement cost was $180, and $180 was the difference between her mother's Tuesday medication and an empty Wednesday. The security officer had powered it off before setting it down. The black screen gave back a pale, distorted version of her face. Across the table, the officer's Rolex caught the fluorescent light at 20-second intervals as he turned his wrist to check the time. She watched it without meaning to. The watch was gold-cased, clean, precise, the kind of object that existed entirely outside the economy of packing tape and Tuesday medications. It ticked with the composed indifference of something that had never needed to calculate. The wall clock above the door was analog. It ticked louder. She counted the ticks. 40 minutes had passed since the elevator. Upstairs on the 8th floor, the proxy consultation would be moving through its procedural stages. Richard would have filed the expedited incapacitation certification. The board would be convening. William would be in suite 703 floors above the floor she had mopped this morning, his IV line carrying whatever increment of compound Richard had introduced in the window created by her arrest. She thought about the antidote in William's system. She thought about the half-life of the counter-agent she had synthesized, the absorption rate she had calculated against his body weight, and the estimated concentration of the paralytic. She had run the numbers in the basement closet on the first night and the second hour of work before she had let herself consider whether any of it would matter. The numbers had been good, not certain. Good. She looked at the cracked phone screen, at the pale, distorted version of her face inside it. She thought about what Richard had said in Suite 700. Uneducated people should not be left unsupervised around medical equipment. She thought about the way he had said it. Conversational, easy, the tone of a man describing a category rather than a person. A man who had spent long enough at the top of a particular hierarchy that the people below a certain threshold had ceased in any practical sense to fully register. She thought about all the rooms she had been the smartest person in, the ones where she had stayed quiet, stayed useful, stayed safely inside the outline of what her uniform suggested she was capable of. The laboratory where she had done her doctoral work nights and weekends because the daytime hours belonged to the job that kept her mother's insurance active. The toxicology conference where she had sat in the back row and not raised her hand because the badge around her neck said catering staff, and the paper she had published the previous year under a different name was being cited in the keynote. The weight of it sat in the room with her. The accumulated specific weight of knowing and remaining silent, of precision hidden inside yellow rubber gloves. The wall clock ticked. She was going to lose the job. She understood that with the clarity that comes when a thing stops being a possibility and becomes a sequence of administrative steps already in motion, She understood also what the job's absence meant: the insurance, the Tuesday medication. Her mother's voice on the phone last Sunday, careful and light, the voice of a woman trying not to cost anything. The crack in the phone screen caught the fluorescent light. She looked at it for a long time, then she looked at the wall. At the single narrow window set high in the wall above the door, its glass frosted, admitting a rectangle of corridor light, and through the frosted glass, moving in the corridor beyond it, the shape of someone pacing, back and forth, short steps close together. The particular pacing of someone who could not leave and could not stay still. Jennifer looked at the shape behind the frosted glass. She thought about Ashley's eyes in the corridor, the way they had moved to the cart, the way they had moved to Richard's retreating back. The specific quality of fear that has been worn so long it has shaped itself to the body, become structural, become part of the way a person stands in rooms. She thought about Ashley pressing the tablet to her chest. She thought about what was on that tablet: encrypted medical logs, 12 days of them. Every observation, every vital reading, every nursing note from William's ward. Ashley had been recording them. It was her job to record them. She had been in the room for the morning rounds, the evening checks, the moments when Richard had adjusted the IV concentration and noted it in the chart under a diagnostic code that did not correspond to any treatment protocol for the condition he had documented on admission. Ashley had recorded all of it. It was on the tablet. The tablet was in the corridor. The shape behind the frosted glass kept pacing. The wall clock ticked. The Rolex turned. Somewhere above her, 50 floors of hospitals stacked their weight into the ground, and at the top of them, Richard was uncapping his monogrammed pen. Jennifer looked at her cuffed wrists. She looked at the cracked phone screen. She looked at the rectangle of frosted light. She could not move. She could not call anyone. She could not reach the room, or the IV line, or the pen about to sign William's life into Richard's possession. But William's finger had moved against the sheet. She held that fact. Small, specific, certain. The antidote was in his system. The receptor sites were clearing. The man in the bed was not the man Richard's certification described. She was completely trapped in the dark, but Richard was about to learn that a seed once planted cannot be ungrown. The boardroom doors opened inward. Richard did not look up. He was seated at the head of the mahogany table, the proxy document centered before him, the gold monogrammed pen held between two fingers at a slight angle, the angle of a man performing the final unhurried movement of a thing already decided. Around him, 8 board members sat in the specific stillness of people who had been told this was a formality and had arranged their faces accordingly. The incapacitation certification was signed. The transfer documentation was signed. The pen was moving toward the final authorization line. The doors opened. Richard looked up. William walked through them under his own power. He was not moving quickly. He did not need to. He crossed the threshold in a hospital gown, bare feet, finding the cold marble without hesitation, and the quality of his movement was not the movement of a man in recovery. It was the movement of a man who had been somewhere and had come back from it, and who understood exactly where he was and exactly what he had returned to stop. His face was the face of controlled fury, not hot, not loud, the cold, specific fury of someone who has had time lying in a bed to understand the full shape of what was done to them. He walked to the head of the table. Richard had not moved. The pen was still in his hand. His face had undergone a rapid, visible recalibration, moving through surprise, through reassessment, arriving at an expression that was not quite fear and not quite composure, the expression of a man whose model of the situation has just been revised without his permission. William's hand came down on the proxy document, flat, final. The sound of it was not loud. It did not need to be. "This meeting," William said, "is over." The board members looked at the document beneath William's hand. They looked at William. They looked at Richard. The silence in the room was the particular silence of 8 people simultaneously revising their understanding of what kind of meeting this had actually been. Richard set the pen down. Carefully. The gold barrel caught the light as it rolled a quarter turn and stopped. William. His voice was measured clinical, the voice of a physician addressing a patient who has become confused. You're not well. You've been in acute neurological decline for 2 weeks. Whatever you think is happening right now. I know exactly what is happening, William said. He looked at Richard with the calm of a man who has already decided. I know what was in my water. The doors opened again. Ashley came through, first tablet in hand, its screen active, its display visible to the nearest board members before she had fully entered the room. Behind her, Jennifer walked in. She was uncuffed. Her gray uniform was still stained with the floor cleaner from 72 hours ago. Her canvas shoes were still waterlogged at the toe. She carried nothing. She needed nothing. She stopped 3 feet inside the doorway and stood with her hands at her sides and looked at Richard across the length of the mahogany table. She did not speak. She did not need to speak yet. The silence around her was not empty. It was full, dense, the silence of a woman who has been waiting with great patience for a room to catch up to what she already knows. Richard looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. A rapid internal sequence, the recalculation of a man retracing his steps, looking for the moment he had miscounted. He looked at her uniform, her shoes, her gloves still yellow, still heavy, still exactly what he had always seen when he looked at her. He looked at her face. She looked back. The logs, William said without turning from Richard. Go back 14 days. Every adjusted concentration, every falsified diagnostic code, every IV modification charted under a treatment protocol that does not exist for my documented condition. He paused. Ashley has been recording since admission. The encryption key is registered to my personal legal account. It was my request. Ashley set the tablet on the table in front of the nearest board member. The screen showed a clean, time-stamped medical log entry after entry, each one carrying Richard's access credentials, each one documenting a precise incremental increase in compound concentration. Richard looked at the tablet. He looked at his smartwatch. The movement was involuntary, Jennifer noted. The instinct of a man checking a timeline, confirming a window, calculating whether something could still be contained. His eyes moved to the time display. He looked at it for 2 full seconds. She watched him understand. The neurotoxin's half-life had passed. The compound was no longer active in William's system. There was no medical basis remaining for the incapacitation certification he had signed. The document under William's hand was not a formality. It was evidence. Richard's hand moved toward the proxy document. William's hand was already there. Don't, William said. One word. Quiet. Absolute. Richard's hand stopped. The board member at the nearest seat had turned the tablet toward the member beside him. The log was moving around the table now, screen to screen, the time-stamped entries accumulating their meaning in the room, the way compound interest accumulates invisibly, then all at once. Richard looked at Jennifer again. His jaw was set. His white coat was perfectly pressed. His monogrammed pen lay on the table between them, gold and useless, exactly as far from his reach as it was from hers. You, he said. The word came out stripped of its clinical composure, reduced, small. Jennifer looked at him across the mahogany table. She looked at the pen. She looked at the torn, scrambling expression on his face, the expression of a man whose single blind spot had just become the full width of his vision. She said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, because silence chosen and controlled was a different order of power than anything she could have said. And she had known that since the first morning, she had knelt on his Italian marble and understood that the most dangerous thing in Suite 700 was not his certification or his compound or his $500 million transfer document. It was her, quiet, patient, and entirely underestimated. The board member at the far end of the table reached for his phone. His hands were steady. His voice when he spoke was the voice of a man performing a clear procedural function. I'm calling federal authorities, he said. Richard looked at the document under William's hand. He looked at the tablet moving around the table. He looked at Ashley standing at the door with the particular stillness of someone who has stopped being afraid. He looked at Jennifer. The king had returned to his throne, and the arrogant executioner was about to become the prey. The federal agents arrived at 11:04 a.m., 2 of them. Dark suits, clean credentials, the unhurried efficiency of people for whom this kind of room was not unfamiliar. They entered through the boardroom's main doors and crossed to the head of the table without theatrics, without announcement, moving with the quiet authority of an institution that did not need to perform its power, because its power was structural and old and entirely sufficient. Richard was still seated. He had not moved since the board member made the call. He had sat with his hands flat on the table and his white coat perfectly pressed and his monogrammed pen lying useless 2 feet from his right hand, and he had watched the room reorient itself around a new set of facts, with the stillness of a man who has run every remaining calculation and found no exit in any of them. William stood at the head of the table. He had not sat down. He would not sit down until this was finished. The senior agent set a credentials folder on the table and opened it without ceremony. "Dr. Richard Aldrin," he said, "we have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of attempted murder, criminal fraud, and the unlawful administration of a controlled neurotoxic compound." Richard looked at the warrant. His face was composed. It was the composition of a man holding something together through will alone, the last structural application of a discipline that had until this morning never been tested from the outside. He looked up from the warrant and across the table at Jennifer. She met his eyes. She did not look away. She did not look satisfied. She looked simply like someone who had finished a piece of work and was observing its completion with the clear, unembellished attention it deserved. "This woman," Richard said, his voice controlled, deliberate, still reaching for the register of authority, "is a janitor. She has no medical credentials, no legal standing, and no—" "Dr. Jennifer Calloway," William said. The room went quiet. William turned to face the board. His voice was level, unhurried, carrying the weight of a man making a formal declaration in a room built for formal declarations. Doctoral degree in toxicology, Johns Hopkins. Published researcher in synthetic neurotoxin identification and counteragent development. Former senior consultant to the National Institutes of Health. He paused. "She has been cleaning my floors for 4 months because her mother needed insurance coverage that her consulting work could not provide, and because this hospital's hiring system does not cross-reference doctoral credentials against janitorial applications." Another pause. "That is a failure I intend to correct." The board members were very still. Richard's jaw moved once. He closed it. Ashley stepped forward from the doorway. She held the tablet out to the senior agent with both hands, screen-facing up the encrypted log already unlocked and displaying the full 14-day record. Her hands were steady. Her face was the face of someone who has been afraid for a long time and has just set the fear down and is feeling for the first time in weeks the specific lightness of that absence. The agent took the tablet. He reviewed 3 entries. He looked at his partner. His partner nodded. "Stand up, please," the senior agent said to Richard. Richard stood. He straightened his white coat. The gesture was automatic, the last reflex of a man for whom appearance had always been the primary instrument of authority. He smoothed the lapel. He adjusted the monogrammed edge at his hip. The handcuffs closed around his wrists with a sharp, clean, metallic click. The sound was small in the large room. It was also in its smallness entirely sufficient. It did not need to be large. It needed only to be final. Richard's face changed, not dramatically. A small change, a compression around the eyes, a slight shift in the set of the jaw. The expression of a man for whom the gap between what he believed himself to be and what was currently happening to him had just collapsed into a single, irreconcilable point. The agents walked him toward the door. He passed Jennifer at 3 feet of distance. His white coat was still on. His credentials were still on the lanyard at his chest. For the length of those 3 feet, he was still technically dressed as the man he had been this morning. Then he was through the door. Then he was in the corridor. Then the corridor swallowed him, and the boardroom was quiet, and the white coat was gone, and what remained on the mahogany table was a gold monogrammed pen, a voided proxy document, and the tablet displaying 14 days of evidence in clean time-stamped rows. William turned to Jennifer. He reached into the interior pocket of his hospital gown, an incongruous gesture, and produced a platinum key card. He held it out across the table. It caught the light along its edge, clean and precise, the kind of object made to last. "Head of research," he said. "The full network, effective immediately." He set the key card on the table in front of her. "Your mother's medical debt is cleared as of this morning. I had my attorney handle it before I walked in here." Jennifer looked at the key card. She looked at it for a long moment, the way she had looked at the violet indicator strip in the basement closet, with the clear, focused attention of someone confirming that a result is real before they allow themselves to believe it. She picked it up. The torn white coat lay discarded on the floor near the boardroom door where it had slipped from Richard's shoulders when the agents walked him out. No one moved to retrieve it. It lay where it had fallen open, empty, the monogrammed edge face down against the cold marble. A small pool of water had spread from the base of the ice service cart near the window. Jennifer noticed it on her way to the door. She stepped around it. She looked down at the spilled water on the boardroom floor, but this time she didn't reach for a mop. Fiction. But that feeling of being completely overlooked and degraded simply because of the uniform you wear or the job you hold. We've all felt your frustration. I know I've kept my mouth shut in rooms where I was the smartest person there just to keep the peace and protect my paycheck. What is the most arrogant thing a boss has ever said to you right before you prove them entirely wrong? Drop a comment, like, share, subscribe.